Hi, and welcome to Eminent Americans. I'm your host, Daniel Oppenheimer, bantamweight champion of the contemporary American intellectual scene. My guest on the show today is Anna Gott, founder and CEO of Interintellect, recent emigre to the United States, host of the Hope Axis podcast, and all-around salonier. She runs salons. So I have a general complaint about a lot of interviews of charismatic and successful tech entrepreneurs, which is a bucket that Anna fits into, though not the only bucket that she fits into. And the complaint is that the interviewers, whether they're coming from the business world, the tech world, the journalistic world, tend to ask their guests for their thoughts on everything but the actual thing they have succeeded in doing, which is building their specific business. So the interviewers want to know about the future of technology or its philosophical implications or the politics and culture around it. The problem is there's no reason to believe that these entrepreneurs have any special wisdom, insight, or expertise in those realms. What they do have all of those things in is how they built their specific business, how they succeeded within their specific and often quite competitive industries. But they're not asked much about those things because the interviewers assume that their listeners, particularly when these are sort of journalistic interviewers, they tend to assume their listeners aren't interested in the minutia of these things. And that may be accurate, I don't know. But the alternative is to ask them questions about familiar topics on which they tend to have banal thoughts. So boring interviews. I did not make that mistake with Anna. We did talk some politics, but the focus was really on the areas she knows best and most personally. For instance, how things have changed for the worse over the last few decades in her native country of Hungary, why she thinks that a certain nerdy subset of American conservative intellectuals and journalists seems to have a raging hard-on for her native country and its authoritarian leader, Viktor Orban, and what lessons it may hold for the potential for authoritarianism in the U.S. Mostly, though, we talk about her company, Interintellect, which hosts intellectual salons, both in person and online. And we talk about the art and science of facilitating good conversation, which is a hard thing to do, as anyone would know if they've attended, as I have, lectures, panels, things like that. So this is how Anna makes her bread. She has a deep investment and, at this point, deep expertise in making her salons enjoyable and satisfying to people. She has to get them to spend their hard-earned bread to participate in her things, so she can't fuck around. She's thought a lot about it. She's iterated a lot with her company, and she has wisdom and insight on the topic that most other people don't have. And I found it fascinating talking to her about it, listening to her offer her own expertise, proposing my half-baked theories, have her respond to them. It's great. So I hope you enjoy as much as I did. Thanks. Anna, welcome to Eminent Americans. You're hereby anointed an eminent American by the power vested in me.
Thank you so much for having me.
I was listening a little bit to, I don't know if it was maybe not the most recent episode of your podcast, but you said something that was a little bit ominous and mysterious to me, but I wanted you to elaborate on it, which was you said, I take the timeline seriously. We don't have that much time. What are you worried about?
I mean, I said this on that particular episode in a political context, but ever since I was a kid and the first time I listened to Bob Dylan in more seriousness, let us not talk falsely now has been my favorite line, I think, in all of popular music. Yeah, the hour is getting late, there's always something to fix. And, I'm a political immigrant from a country that I loved and I watched fall apart. I immigrated multiple times since then. And I take this really, really seriously. I do think that if you leave a place that turned into a worse version of itself, you're kind of endowed with this weird, not really asked for responsibility that you have to tell other people when you start noticing similar patterns happening elsewhere.
Yeah.
Because we're all being the frogs being boiled,
Right.
And I have already been boiled as a frog, and I know what's at the end of this. And it's I work in tech, however much Interintellect is connecting the different, polarities within culture, tech, humanities, men, women, left, right, old, young. I still spend most of my time with tech people, and some of them adore the dictatorship that I left, or even the dictatorship that they are trying to build in this country. And then I have to be the unpleasant person, and I'm a very unpleasant person. I always get people drunk fast, and the conversation is really great. But then I kind of give them a piece of my mind because I do know what I'm talking about and they do not. And that gives me a different job. And it's true for Americans as well. Like Americans have gone through things that other countries have not. And I also don't like it when Americans are kind of cowed into, being ashamed of being too big and too cool and too powerful. I think those are really cool things. You should be really proud of it. And if you notice some dumb shit being done by another country that you tried and it doesn't work, and it's not that the real version of it has never been tried, then you kind of have to say something, And I do think that real dictatorship has been tried, and no, it's not good. And no, it does not lead to more business or more freedom or more sex. None of this is true. If anybody's listening, I'm really sorry to open with this bad news. The good news is that a lot of other things do work, and you should try those other things.
So you're from Hungary. You grew up in Hungary and left when you were how old?
I was nearly 30 when I left. I really wanted to make it work there. I had a whole life there. I was pretty well. My parents are very well known. I was kind of well known on my own right. I had an apartment, a boyfriend, a car, nice clothes, good jobs. I had a very fulfilling life, and then the air was kind of sucked out from our world, and very slowly and through in waves and with different first kind of trial projects here and there, I had to conclude that I can't live there. And it's a little bit different, when Americans are going to Canada, like that's a very different setup because you have a really big country. Unless you work in an industry that really is just concentrated into one location in the world, you kind of can move around. But if you come from a tiny as European capital, especially in an extremely centralized country like Hungary, where there's not even a second city,
Yeah.
and if you're in the intelligentsia, and if you are a liberal who very strongly believes in certain civic liberties, then they can kind of bully you into leaving. And I think that was their strategy, because you can't just like kill the intellectuals because you're part of the EU. So you have to kindly or less kindly make them go away. When I went away, it was relatively still benign. But after I had left, maybe 2 years later, 3 years later, much more sinister things started happening, from suicide waves in the film industry and in the cultural industries, which was horrifying. A lot of my friends killed themselves at the time, especially men. It was a very dishonorable time, and it was very traumatizing for all my generation. But all the kind of tapping scandals, lawsuits, the closing of the newspapers, pushing people into the creator economy at a time when the creator economy was not really built out yet. And also, it's just not a rich country where people can, without advertising, really sustain themselves as creators necessarily, because you don't have an international market to support you. And then killing off basically the civic layer, civic society layer, where foreign investors could have helped a little bit with some of the more, they helped with right-wing projects, but they also wanted to help with left-wing projects, and that was also curtailed. I was just at the new school at an event called Comparative Authoritarianisms, which is a really sinister title, and it's kind of fucking tragic that we have to compare authoritarianisms because there are multiple different versions of them, and none of them is good. But there was a wonderful professor there who actually knows much more data about Hungary, of how they actually did it. And it's basically the Putin Erdogan playbook that they both learned from Egypt. So from the Egyptian dictators who worked out this financial, political, and propaganda playbook. And it's doable. Like you can just, it's kind of sad, but you can just do it.
So I had Rod Dreher on the show, and it was to talk about his recent book, which had nothing to do with Hungary, but obviously I think he lives there mostly full time now. And there obviously is this phenomenon of conservative, often Catholic or Orthodox Americans who fall in love with Hungary. And in some cases, in Rod's case, he moved there, but there's other folks like Tucker Carlson, right? Didn't he do a week or two of his show there? And there's a guy who wrote an article about who's here in Texas, Gladden Pappin, who I think is one of the editors of American Affairs. And he has a little bit of a love affair with Hungary. I'm totally confounded by it. I don't get it, but I'm curious what you make of it and what you think their experience is. Because, some of these people, Carlson is just, he's kind of a wreck of a human being. Like, he did it because he sensed some opportunity or something like that. But some of these people are they're earnest, right? I think they're sincere. Yeah. Maybe JD Vance has had some Hungry love or something like that. Like, just as somebody who's native to that country and then felt like you had to leave because you just couldn't have an authentic life there doing the things that you want to, what do you make of those folks?
It's very complicated for me because some of these people I really respect. Maybe I don't agree with them, but I think those two things can be separate. I think there are two things, maybe three things at play here. One is that it's a beautiful country, and that's also why it's so hard to leave it, even when it gets really, really bad. It's a very nice place to live. You also have a kind of propagandistic cushioning around these people where they don't really speak the language. They are being told what they want to hear about it. They have a little bit of a homecoming experience, like, oh, what if the world could just be Christian nationalists and flowers and smiley women. The problem is that this is not true. First of all, not everybody is a Christian nationalist in Hungary,
Yeah.
and the regime was very careful to make sure that we never hear from them. The part that I don't really understand, especially years into it, you have falling fertility rates and marriage rates.
Mm-hmm.
You have definitely a falling quality in education, publishing, the general public language being used. You have a regime that is quite antithetical to business innovation and the capital amassment by citizens that is outside the government. It's a nationalization project that's going on. So, I'm a Christian libertarian. And as a Christian libertarian, I'm telling people when they listen that whether you approach it from a Christian point of view or a libertarian point of view or a pro-business point of view, you're not going to get your money's worth. And this is really sad, but this is also the truth. I don't know if it's love, you can't really argue with it, but you just sit down and talk with Hungarian women. Do you want to have kids here? When you have had kids, did you have a good experience in the hospital? Do you feel that this country is child friendly? Is your transportation resolved? Is your job security resolved? Is your child's health resolved? Do you feel that people are happy to be sitting in a restaurant with a toddler in Hungary or not? I don't. If you go to Poland, if you go to Austria, we actually have deeply Catholic, for better or worse, and economically very pro-business, pro-innovation countries, and they are often politically much more liberal than Hungary. These are not nationalized economies or nationalizing economies. I don't understand why Budapest and not Warsaw in this
Right.
sense.
Well, so let's say I'm just speculating. Let's say you're JD Vance. This is my imagined version of JD Vance. But let's say you're JD Vance. You're genuinely a Christian nationalist. You're the sort of Hungarian version of it. And on some deep soul level, you're not really a liberal, right? You're actually okay with a world in which the dominant culture is somewhat oppressive and it's somewhat repressive towards minority cultures and minority ideas. Is the Hungarian version of Rod Dreher or JD Vance, are they happy right now? Like, is it a nice place to be for that person? I mean, in a little bit, in the sense that, like, if you transported all of us back to like 1950s America, like Mad Men America, right? There's a lot of dudes who would be happy with that. Like, they'd be like, yeah, okay, so women don't have equal rights, but like, it's pretty good for me.
First of all, that's a brilliant question. I never thought about this. Okay. There is a reason why there is no Vance and no Dreher in Hungary. They don't have Hungarian equivalents, right? For somebody to live off of Substack at the quality that it is, with the diversity of thought that Dreher produces there every week, the freedom of speech he has, the fact that there is an American startup with A16Z investment called Substack, where you can run a business, where you don't have to collaborate with the government, local or national, unless you really want to, and you seek out, and you have to actually work for it in America. It's not like the government actually shows up, right? You don't have intellectuals like this in places that are not as innovative and free and decentralized America. You don't have somebody in Hungary who grows up in a little village with an addict mother, then goes to an Ivy League university, because there's no Ivy League university in Hungary, right? You only have nationalized universities. There's no Yale. There's no way somebody can have an Indian wife in the Hungarian elite who then goes and works for Peter Thiel. There's no Hungarian Peter Thiel. There's no Hungarian Stanford where Peter Thiel works, and there's no Hungarian PayPal, and there's no Hungarian Palantir, and there's a reason for that. And then for that person to become political elite like Vance in a way where he is not like fired or marginalized in 2 months after he has done his duty, quote unquote, that he was put there for. but that he can actually have a lifetime political career if he wants to, even if he fails. Like, I think Americans like to forget that these archetypes only exist in America. Like, only America is free enough that these archetypes can even exist and grow into prominence. And undoing the very mechanisms by these people sometimes, or through their messaging, you would think that they want to undo the very levers that lifted them.
Right.
It's kind of it's kind of, I have to say, it's absurd with all due respect. Like,
Yeah.
I understand there is maybe a misunderstanding here. It's not malevolence, but that's not how it goes, right? The last extreme pockets of Central European innovation were pre-Holocaust, I'm sorry to say. And those people don't live there anymore. They and their descendants live in America and in Australia and sometimes in England. So I would just ask for some caution maybe when we daydream about places that are much worse than where we currently live. There's something very sentimental about Budapest and generally the Central European summer in all those countries. It's just so beautiful. It's really hard to leave. And I very rarely go back, but I went back last year because my dad passed away, and I went back and I was there for almost 2 weeks. And there are all these people there that I adore who couldn't leave for various reasons, because they have kids there in school or divorced and the father is there, or because it's a very culture specific job that this individual has spent 30 years building in the Hungarian language, and there's no way that they could restart their life somewhere else, or they work in film or theater, teach in a high school, something that is not. I mean, I also left with very low export value knowledge, and I just restarted my life from zero. I restarted my life from complete zero 10 years ago, 12 years ago.
Do you enjoy it when you go back? Can you experience it kind of as a tourist, experience the beauty and the good things about the culture without that sort of oppressive, claustrophobic, I can't really be a full person here?
Yeah, I mean, I go back as a foreigner, and I don't feel threatened in the same way as we felt during the onset of the Fidesz regime. But it is sad to see my friends struggling. It's sad to see how poor everybody is. Even the rich people are really poor because everything is very, very, very expensive in Hungary, more expensive than Germany or France or Brussels. It is a cautionary tale to see some parts of the intelligentsia living in their own little world, and not really just they got used to there not being freedom, and they are kind of optimizing for the good life. And what makes, I think, Budapest a particularly interesting case, and this is where, in my view, the illusions of the locals who stayed or who dream back from some other place in the world and the illusions of some parts of the American right overlap, is that Budapest is very conductive of this dream. Like, if you want to be in a bubble, if you want to be Dreher and think that this is truly deeply a Christian society that cares for the little guy and women and children, which it is not, sadly, then you can lull yourself into it. It's really pretty. The only thing to me that comes, it's a weird analogy, but in America, California is like this. Like, some of the most brutal things, the brutal businesses in American history are being run from California, right? If you're in the music industry, TV industry, tech industry, and then you're there, you have wolf against wolf everywhere. And then you go outside and you see this idyllic, seaside and the palm trees or whatever you're looking at. And you have this kind of contrast. Whereas in New York, it's like
right,
grimy, gritty shit outside. And then the human warmth is kind of what keeps it going, and culture and ideas and innovation. But Budapest gives you this. I mean, it's a place where the Holocaust happened, where there was a bloody revolution in 1956, basically razored off by the Soviets. This is a place where, when I was a child, we used to live next to Parliament. Every 15th of March, every year, we had to basically evacuate because the demonstrations in the 80s in front of the Parliament were so violent. And Europe is really weird in the sense that some of the worst atrocities in the history of humanity happened in these idyllic places. You look at Dresden, like if you read Vonnegut, you know that, Dresden was a little Versailles, the Paris on the Elbe. And I think it's beautiful food, lovely people, sunshine, birds, trees are great. But there is another level, which we call history. And I would urge people to also bear that part in mind. It's often uglier than the nice parts.
I'm curious, when you moved to the States, so how long ago was it? You said it was about 10 years ago?
So I first moved to London and was kind of stuck there for a long time. And then I spent the pandemic in Brussels. I thought it would be a very short stay. And then COVID-19 had a very different idea about this. I spent a lot of time in the US in the past 5 years. And I only relocated less than a year ago.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm pretty new. I'm on an O1 visa, so I'm an exceptional alien, which I love. It's the best compliment I ever got. I always felt like an alien. I never felt like an exceptional alien. And I'm like, okay, so I'm visiting Earth.
Is that like high skilled? Is that some like high skilled sort of unique?
There are two O1s. There's one for the hot people, for the entertainment and models, and then there's the smart people. The first time I came into US with my O1, the immigration officer looked at me and was like, "You're not a model, right?" I'm like, no, I'm on the other one. I was like, "Yeah, I guess so. I think I don't hit the height."
That's funny. This actually makes my question even a little bit more interesting. So there's a way in which I was about to say there's a way in which you feel very American to me, which is not to say that you don't seem Hungarian or European or something like that.
When people put makeup on me, I look very Eastern European. I just had a photo shoot, and it was ridiculous that the more makeup they put on me, I look like the Central European woman in all the photos. And I was like, if you ask ChatGPT to like create the median,
you mean this is like you in that in the movie, like the action movie or the espionage movie, where there's some American or British spy in like Central Europe. And then there's some femme fatale Eastern European
with a cigarette.
Maybe she's a prostitute. Maybe she's a spy
or a rocket scientist.
Or she's the wife of an oligarch. That's what you look like. Well, this is just a question of like moving to the U.S., which is there's certain ways in which I'm sure it is a huge adaptation, and then there's certain cultural ways in which it's not. Because I'm assuming you were mainlining American culture probably from a very young age. I'm just curious. Like, you have all the references, you understand the landscape. I don't think we're that hard a country to decipher is part of what I'm saying.
Yeah. So I was so surprised maybe 7 or so years ago when I studied the first incarnation of InterIntellect. I never really thought of coming here full time. And even when I did, I first thought I would go to California because I'm a startup founder and the rules are rules, whatever. I don't know what I was thinking. And then I always felt like Americans kind of chose me. I was trying to raise money. And then in London, nobody or almost nobody gave me money. And the first American VC that I pitched to was like, yeah, I get this. Here's some money. And I was kind of disoriented because, I'm as an Eastern European, I always optimize for suffering, like what will give me the worst possible time. And it was very counterintuitive to me for the first year to realize that I actually will be able to do what I'm very good at and what I really enjoy, because like the Americans think that this is like the most easy to understand thing to do with your life, but nobody in Europe thinks that, right? And then it happened even within the US, like, okay, where would I take InterIntellect? And then New York kind of wanted InterIntellect, and it was so obvious. And even within New York, like, where should we be like a Brooklyn thing? And then Brooklyn was like, no, you're too capitalist for us, and you drink like real milk. We don't like you. There is something about the wisdom of the markets in this sense that there is something like person, place, fit, not just product market fit. And I always find that all my qualities as a person, I was always such a weirdo. It was always so hard for me to integrate and make friends in Budapest. And, there was a lot of social inclusion because I'm just weird and say weird things. And not to mention how it was in the UK, like that was a complete disaster for me. And all the qualities that people didn't like me for in Hungary, they adore me for in America. One more reason why it's not, it's not an ideal America. It's more like the complete other end of the spectrum, which maybe JD doesn't fully understand yet, but maybe he will learn Hungarian and be able to read the papers.
The flip side of that is I imagine that if I move to Hungary or if you're Rod Dreher, and Rod will get back here, I don't think he's going to be there forever, but like that there would be a sense in which I would never be able to become Hungarian. There would be spheres of the culture and the society that would always be mysterious to me, opaque, and maybe just not accessible. That's my default assumption about most places on the planet, and one of the things that's not necessarily unique about America, but unusual about, is that it's a pretty open society in that sense.
Absolutely. You can't become French,
Right.
right?
That's
It's
right.
not like you move to France, and even if you're there and you get a French passport, nobody will ever think of you as a French person.
Maybe your children. I mean, you hear about, like in Germany, Turkish families who've been there for generations who are not thought of as fully German.
I was watching this Mary Beard thing about ancient Rome, and apparently ancient Rome was a little bit like that. It wanted to assimilate you.
Yeah.
And it was more like if you wanted to keep your like tribal religious affiliations, you had to fight to keep them, because the mechanism in society was much more about assimilation and just similarities. But I just wanted to say another thing about a thing that kind of strikes me about American culture, and it's kind of how something really good about this place can be also a weakness. And you really see that when you are reading fiction or watching TV, how, A Handmaid's Tale is really nonsensical. That's not at all how dictatorships work. These are not the moral compromises people make in dictatorships. This is not the kind of atrophy that happens to people's sense of self and their personal values or their families. Dictatorships have a very particular way of poisoning the home, because first you think that the home is going to be the safe space, and then you can do the Václav Havel thing outside and lie outside, but at home there's truth. But what happens is that eventually those lies seep into the home, right? Because you have to feed your son with the money you make outside in an immoral way. Now your son looks up at you at some point when he grows up. Now, what does that make of your relation? Like, it's a kind of famous misunderstanding that there can be a private sphere and a public sphere in a dictatorship, and that would save you. Or, I mean, Masha Gessen wrote an excellent piece maybe 7 years ago in the New Yorker about Chernobyl, and why the TV series Chernobyl is, or like Death of Stalin is like, I loathe that movie. That's
I
just,
haven't. I did see the Chernobyl series. I didn't see Death of. I'm trying to remember why she didn't like it. Right. I mean, I thought it was. Yeah.
she picks up on a couple of things that really only the people who have experienced the dictatorship understand. That you don't have to censor people in an established dictatorship, because they will censor themselves. Because what you do is with the entire incentive system and disorient people. And from then on, you don't have to worry about them. One thing that I worry about with contemporary politics in America is that there is a kind of disorientation in the system, whether the goals that they are trying to reach whilst people are being disoriented is positive or negative. That's up to everybody's personal evaluation. Probably it's a mix. But the disorientation itself, and I think with this, Americans are very naive, are extremely lasting. So it's not like you're a 21-year-old man who is now being radicalized somewhere online, and now you think that all women should like not do university and have 17 kids by you personally, but you don't have to get involved. And it's not like you can kind of poison somebody's mind and take away their altruism and empathy and sense of shared humanity with other people, and that will just somehow grow back later if this regime is over. That generation will be like this kind of forever. And I think that messing with people's kind of source code when it comes to their morality and belief in human freedom is really dangerous. I don't really know what, I mean, of course, my work is all about like a free idea marketplace where you have everything and you actually have to like compete with each other. But things tipping that way, I think there's room for caution there.
What would it look like for us to be the frog that's getting boiled? And what would it look like, not at a sort of state level so much, but you're talking about a kind of cultural level, at an interior level, to start internalizing some of these ways of seeing the world that ultimately might be conducive in the long run to becoming a more authoritarian society. But I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. At a personal level, right? Yeah, sure. Some people are being poisoned by these social media platforms, by getting involved in these sort of alt-right or whatever we call that these. I don't even know what we call that these days. But getting involved in some of these really toxic spaces, whether it's left-wing or right-wing. Yeah, sure. Our brains are malleable. Our brains can be poisoned by ideology and toxicity and resentment and things like that at an individual level. But it sounded to me like you were saying something bigger than that, which was there can be a kind of poisoning of the culture that doesn't go away. That's a hard thing for me. I don't want to just like viscerally just sort of disagree with it because it hasn't been my subjective experience, because I may just not be in the spaces where that's happening. And so I think everything's fine. We're a prisoner of whatever social or cultural space we're in. I have a lot of worries about the way that, American culture sucks. Like, I'm not a defender of the basic health of American culture, but I have not perceived that, like, we are becoming a more authoritarian or something culture in maybe the sense that you're saying, but I'm curious. What are you worried about for us?
I think my experience in the past couple of years has been a great disappointment in what a lot of people in America perceive as a cultural form of nihilism, where words don't mean anything anymore, religion doesn't mean anything anymore, America doesn't mean anything anymore, etc., etc. Where you see extreme institutional inertia, you see certain groups hijacking cultural institutions, educational institutions, etc., etc. And what you're observing now, and this is, I think, the real kind of culture war being played out in America right now, it's not between left and right. I think the left is currently losing and it's kind of on the sidelines in this game. What you're seeing is basically two different responses being given to the very correct emotion that there was some kind of nihilism taking over late stage Democrat messaging that just felt increasingly uncomfortable to larger and larger groups of Americans. One of the responses is, the Hungarianized fantasy of a glorious past where men were real men and women were real women, whatever the fuck that means. And America produced things. And, there was like a strong leader, FDR. What if that was now right wing? Like that would be even better. And it's almost like a cosplay. And when I sense worrying signals, it usually comes from this group. And I will tell you why. The other group is the abundance agenda people, right? Who are like, when something works because there is more stuff. Really basic, like Tocqueville. Leave people alone, give them freedom, let them be prosperous, and they will be peaceful, democratic, and better friends of each other. Right? It's a very, very, very core. And, they are like, oh, well, when there is more housing, when there is more money, when there are more jobs, when there are more babies and more community gardens and theaters and universities and, things people have invented in that state or in that city and more people want to move there, these are really good signs. Or when you see some things drop, like less drug deaths, less maternal mortality, etc., great, right? It's a little bit more data driven. And you do see, especially in the abundance crowd, both Dems and Republicans together, which I think is a really good sign. It means that it is up to something. The reason why I find it really interesting on the other side is that if you actually sit down and have a deeper conversation with anybody from Vance to Dreher, etc., they are actually abundance agenda people. It's just that some of the policies that they are trying to propose, which centralizes power in many ways, or tells you what kind of thing you have to innovate, or how closely you have to be intertwined with governmental organizations. I know from my own personal experience with another type of, or an oligarchy that may or may not yet exist in America, that that's not good. And I think that both parties kind of want the same. They want less cultural nihilism, more freedom, and more stuff. I just think that we will get there faster if we do the more open and more decentralized version of it.
So what are you worried about? That version that you gave is like, maybe we'll go down the wrong path for a few years. We're not optimizing, but we'll stay in this kind of middle path. And I think I have a hard time because my natural tendency is just to assume everything will be fine.
That's good.
And we've had versions of wokeness before. The left went crazy in the 1960s. The left went crazy in the 1930s. And then there was a backlash. And we've had versions of right-wing authoritarian tinged movements before, and we just persist. My tendency is to assume this, whatever we're in right now, whether it's ascendant wokeness a few years ago or ascendant Trumpy bullshit authoritarian, that we'll just come back to this basic, sort of fucked up, but basically free equilibrium, right? Like we're not Pleasantville, right? America's a fucked up culture in a lot of ways, but it's not Hungary. It's not China. I think you're more worried than I am.
I worry about two things in particular. It's not catastrophizing in the sense that, oh my God, unless everybody stops right now, tomorrow there's going to be a major fallout. With an individual, as with a society, you can build bad habits, and then they are very hard to get rid of. And I feel like we are on the kind of precipice of certain things becoming a habit because people forget a time when we didn't say those things publicly yet, or we didn't think those things 5 minutes ago. And it's good to just be a little bit level-headed about it. One thing that I do worry about, and I had the same worry 10 years ago about the wokes, and one of the reasons why I started Interintellect was because I thought that I'm not going to be told by people that I'm not allowed to talk about certain things or ask certain questions, because that's just not how human intellect works, or intellectualism or intellectual inquiry works. And I refused. So I built a conversation platform that was not woke, and it was very intellectually diverse. And I was really worried 10 years ago about extremization. And I'm not just, when I talk about extremization, I'm not necessarily talking about people burning down cities, right? Like that's a different version. Just extremism in thinking. Like it's really important to think that people should feel safe from sexual harassment at work. That doesn't mean that every man is a rapist, right? Like there's a giant concept creep. It's, it's great to think that minorities should be given fair chances to enter universities. That doesn't mean that we have to drag in a bunch of people whose test results are not good and then just hope for the best that they will be good doctors. Like that's just not how we benefit a society. And maybe this is really just the equilibrium that every 10 years there's something else. I think now we are seeing the concept creep on the right and certain pockets of the right. We live in a moment, and maybe this was true about wokes as well, I wasn't here yet, that, there are powerful media players who are welcoming of extremist talk. And so, things can become part of everyday parlance very quickly. I do think that if at any point in your life you convince somebody that, I don't know, all men are bad or whatever shit the wokes are pushing, or all white people are colonists. I'm a white person, and I definitely, none of my Ashkenazi Jewish ancestors ever fought or colonized anything. They were like historians and teachers. If at any time somebody really convinces you deep in your heart that some major injustice is being done against you, you will live with some of that vibe your whole life. Either because you will continue to espouse it, or because you will dedicate so much time to countering it when you reach your deprogramming moment. And I just see the same thing now happening, coming in from, dark enlightenment, coming in from like, we should have a king. Like, if somebody really, even just for 5 minutes, thinks that America should have a king, that's a pretty big fucking thing to think. And that is as nonsensical as all men are bad. And that will do something to that individual, right? I believe in the sacredness of the soul, and I like it when powerful players, for their own short-term gains, play with people's souls. That's not democratic. That's not marketplace of ideas. That's playing with like primal urges that we all have, of course. Like I've never been more feminist in my life than when I was constantly fed that I have been done some injustice to, right? And then you have to kind of reach an almost agnostic place in your life when you're like, there are some injustices being done to women because society doesn't become perfect overnight, and maybe it will not in my lifetime, but like I'm just going to contribute my little thing and not get used to bad things. The other thing that worries me is there are many potentials in this world for global fallouts. It's not just up to America. America has enemies, right? America has enemies that the last time that it really successfully fought against, it was a high functioning democracy. And we have no real proof that, a more centralized or more dictatorial power that is established in peacetime, not for countering the threat of war, that might be better. I don't see a society where everybody is everybody's enemy, where men and women can't sit down and have a proper conversation about the world, where old and young don't trust each other, where different states, different ethnicities, different religions are kind of pitted against each other. They don't have the shared media, they don't have a shared reality. I don't see that a society like that would perform as well countering an external threat as a place where people, at least on the base level, consider themselves to be part of the same community. And this is what Tocqueville is all about, that it's when you give people the freedom when they will start seeing themselves as a community. It's not the other way around. Because when I take away your freedom, now suddenly it becomes a place where somebody has more freedom than somebody else, or the inequalities become not just financial, which are kind of normal parts of society, but a very different kind of caste system. Then comes the kind of private program, as the communist countries would have called, where you just like mind your own business and your family and your garden, and you kind of cut yourself off. I don't think that's healthy, and I don't think that's sustainable. I think that leads to moral degradation. I think that leads to rampant nepotism, lower social trust, worse care for one's environment, which in America is already a problem area. And yeah, I think I'm an absolute anti-nihilist, and I'm so happy that Americans are thinking big ideas in politics again about how to end that kind of ossified inertia that we lived in for a long time. But let's keep in mind that we have souls, and other people also have souls, and that there's something sacred about that.
Take me back to the beginning of Interintellect. It's very easy to imagine, oh, okay, like I want to create a platform and a network of people who are holding salons. I want to connect people. I'd be like, oh yeah, that sounds right. Did you file your like 501c3 paperwork or something like that, and get a board of directors and all the nonprofit stuff? That makes sense to me. But as a for-profit endeavor, I'm like, that sounds crazy. But also, that's not my sector. Maybe there are models, and I'm curious, when you were conceptualizing it, what was the business strategy, and who were you looking to as reference points?
I mean, as I said, I believe in the power of markets, and I wanted to do something that is consumer, so people can tell me what they want. My pledge towards the public was that I would use my knowledge about theater, screenwriting, language, and philosophy to create and experiment with and tweak and finally really construct a good MO for a different kind of conversation that complete strangers can have with each other about really pressing questions without uniformity, without falling out, etc., etc. So that was kind of the mission that I had, and I still have. What was also very important to me is making it a creator platform so people can get paid hosting. As an immigrant, I had to restart my whole life from zero. And for a very long time, I knew what it meant to be just a one-sided participant in intellectualism, where I was reading books and listening to podcasts and watching videos, blah, blah, blah. But there was no way for me to interact. And I spent 2.5 years working nights in London. So I was a night editor on financial breaking news overnight. So I would go to work at 10:30 at night and finish at 6:30 in the morning, go home, sleep a few hours, and then I would just go to all these university campuses and interview thousands and thousands of people about like what is missing in their conversations, and they would like share screenshots. I did a full linguistic analysis. This was at the onset of basically ChatGPT, NLP models, and language AI. So suddenly my very theoretical linguistic knowledge could become more technical. And I was thinking at first that maybe I would actually start with an AI company, that there is like something in the chat app that helps you have better conversations, blah, 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 rebuilding society one conversation at a time. And then I kind of had an epiphany, and I had a very interesting trip to San Francisco, and they made me look at my own biases in a different way. And then I realized okay, let's try with the least technical version. Like if there was an apocalypse and, electricity and whatever would be destroyed, I like to joke that if there was an apocalypse and everything would be destroyed, Google would still exist. It would be like a guy sitting under a tree and you're like, hey, where does Daniel live? Oh, 2 caves down, Or like Instagram would be this gossipy grandmother around the campfire who's like, he's out a lot these days with all these girls. Airbnb would be another guy under the tree who's like, this cave that I have, on the seaside is great. People like you loved it. It's only like 4 shells. I don't know. And so I thought like, what would that version of Interintellect be like? And I started with like literally an Excel sheet and a Wix.com website and $5,000 that I had and an Eventbrite account. And it just started growing like crazy. So today we have a public marketplace for events. Anybody can list an event, but there is a 24-hour pending period when there is an editorial review and suggestions. We usually don't do anything, but our guarantee is that everything that's listed on interintellect.com is really good. So we take that very seriously, and we have editors. And then we have a community tier where people pay us monthly, yearly, and we have super supporters who are high wealth individuals. And those people get a lot of free attendance and offline events around the world, and they hang out on our community forum.
I'm curious what you've figured out about what makes for good conversations, because I organize a fair number of events at the university where I work, and it's not easy. More often than not, they're boring. The more people who are involved, the more boring. Like putting 4 people on a panel or in a conversation, I find it just deathly boring. And I say that as somebody who's organizing these things, and I'm curious what you figured out. I mean, I'm sure, and you were talking about your kind of background in theater, I'm sure you have thought in a more hard-nosed, capitalistic way about how you structure conversations such that you're engaging people. And then it's even harder, you put it online, you don't get that in-person energy. What is the craft of sort of facilitating interesting conversations between multiple people?
First of all, yeah, energy in the room. And I treat my business as a show business. It's entertainment. And what you learn in theater is that there is a sacred space that doesn't exist until the people come together and decide that that girl on the balcony is a girl called Juliet and she will die soon. And we all together decide. In conversation theory, I mean, conversations exist because we make them exist, right? Like you and I are talking right now, you're in Austin, I'm in Manhattan. With every word that we utter, we make this conversation exist. This would be the same if we were 20 people. The sacred space definitely is really, really important that you are somewhere else, right? That's why we call it salon. You're in a different space. I also deeply believe in having an external topic. So having, I don't know, this salon is about Dostoevsky, this salon is about nuclear plants, this conversation is about, I don't know, the markets, efficient market hypothesis. So people will come with their own hopes and frustrations and opinions and whatever they think or their curiosities about the topic, but it's not one against the other ever. And it's also not like the audience is like waiting to get something from the host. It's not this transactional moment. It's more like, okay, let's figure something out together, like a group inquiry. There are other rules that we have. One of my favorites is imperfect host, which is something I learned the hard way, my own experience, which is that nobody is interested in a pristine, perfect ex cathedra thing. The great teachers of the antiquity, Buddha, Socrates, Jesus, sat down with the listeners. If you're the host, if you're the panelist, whatever is the authority system in that conversation, you already have so much authority. You don't have to widen it, right? It's like we are the anti-TED Talks. It's not like this. The speaker is on the stage well lit and everybody else is in the dark and shut the fuck up.
Right.
That's not how it goes, right? When you come to Interact, Steven Pinker is sitting with the audience and I'm sorry that even if you're the most well-known writer in America or creator or artist or celebrity, you will have questions and you will be challenged in a very friendly and supportive environment. But people come to Interact events because they want to speak, they want to listen, they want to participate. It's interaction. And one of the core rules that is still happening at the simple standard salons is equal speaking time. So the host speaks as much as everybody else. We're not going to force you to do equal speaking time, but you will get a chance. So everybody knows they will get the mic. There's usually an introduction at the beginning. So you know who this person is, why they came, what is like taking for them in this topic. And so it's very honest, very equal, without compromising on the intellectual quality. I actually think that this is a higher intellectual quality because however smart your special guest is, there is no way that together the room is not smarter.
I want to understand in what sense you mean that, because the thing that I notice in a lot of these contexts is it's not the trolling. I think the trolling is like for an intentional event like this where you have to pay money, like that's not a big issue, right? People want to be there in some sense. What I noticed is everybody wants to get their thought in a way that is not typically strategically optimized for deepening the conversation. So it's not that people are trolling. It's more that's just like, this is my hobby horse. Like, this is what you're talking about, feminism. Here's my experience when I was in college. And so it ends up being just a kind of sequence. It's a sequence of statements about this topic rather than a kind of progressive deepening of the conversation. And in that context, I'm just like, I just want to listen to Paul Krugman because he's a Nobel laureate and he knows a lot about economics. And I don't want So what is the structure whereby people actually make the conversation smarter than the smart person who's been selected to be the featured guest?
First of all, even sometimes just trolley questions can be new to a Paul Krugman who always says the same thing.
Yeah,
otherwise.
Sure.
So I'm kind of welcoming of weird questions. I am quite convinced that every human being on Earth knows something that nobody else knows.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say we have Paul Krugman. That room will have people who love him, who hate him, who are economists, who have no idea about economics. There will be his former students will be there, a former colleague will be there. There will be people who wrote papers based on his idea, proved him. I want to hear from all these people. Together, the room has more information than Paul Krugman, even about Paul Krugman. And these are what we call the super salons when we have a kind of celebrity guest. And when Kevin Kelly was on Interintellect recently, he literally stopped and just started interviewing the attendees. Okay, you have to be Kevin Kelly for that. Like, that's another level of awesomeness. But these attendees are amazing. And I think they're amazing because they get this really strong base respect that you chose to come here. You could have gone anywhere. Like, the entire show business apparatus and technological industries competing for your time and your eyeballs. And you're here and you're not looking at your phone. You're sitting here for 2-3 hours. Either you travel there, like we have a lot of people who like drive across states to come to an offline Interintellect event, or you're like sitting there on your computer, you work the whole day and you could be binge watching some nonsense on Hulu. And instead you're here with your name and your face and you paid for it. And I want to know why you came. I think that's pretty amazing about humans, that they do this with their evenings.
Have you seen the movie Town Bloody Hall? Do you know that movie?
No.
It's about a panel discussion, basically, at a town hall in New York that was a response to an article, an essay, ridiculous essay that Norman Mailer wrote that was kind of like, had a lot of things that pissed off, I think justifiably pissed off feminists. And so they organized this panel discussion.
Norman Mailer never did that.
Right.
I don't know what you're talking about.
They organized this panel discussion with, I think Germaine Greer was on it, Diana Trilling. And then there were all these hot shit writers who you'd know who were in I think Susan Sontag was in the audience. And then D.A. Pennebaker, the great filmmaker who made the great Bob Dylan documentary and a million other things, he filmed it. It's a documentary about a panel discussion. It's totally fascinating. It's totally electric. The energy in that room, and there are people kind of hanging from the rafters, the energy in that room. And I thought of it because of the way you were describing what happens when one of these salons is really working. Is that what it's like at its best, which is a kind of energy in the room, an unexpectedness, a sort of you don't know what's going to happen next, which is different than like this conversation that you and I are having. It's a different kind of conversation. It's about two people kind of locking in, going deep, playing off of each other. But it's not that sort of improvisational, I don't know what's going to happen.
The vibe. This vibe is how an Interintellect salon is.
Okay.
This is how it feels. And one of the things that people tell us a lot, which kind of, I don't know, this is like, I had this conversation once with Jonathan Haidt, who wanted to understand the data. I don't know, like how it works. It was like, people don't feel tired after.
Yeah. They're energized.
Like, mathematize the miracle. And I was like, just enjoy the miracle. You don't have to like formalize it. But I wish I knew, because sometimes it's not there. But I want to use an example of a time when it's not always peaceful. Like, I make it sound like this like lotus eating utopia with the naked girls running around. So it's not really like that. And you will leave with some new opinions, and you will, I mean, if it's a good salon, first of all, the host is somebody who's kind of on the fence about something. So they actually are open-minded and can consider both sides or multiple sides. I did an event around half a year ago that feels like a lifetime ago, but it was half a year ago in New York, called Ideas of Power, where we had 3 panels. There was authoritarianism panel, there was an educating the elites panel about academia, and then there was a secular power versus religious power, or divine power panel at the end. And in the first one, we had Julia Zonevand, John Gans. Second one, we had Musa Garbi, Scott Barry Kaufman. Third one, we had Rebecca Lowe, who is a political philosopher, atheist, and had Shadi Hamid and Jennifer Frey from like the contemporary Muslim, contemporary Christian perspective. And then I created this thing that I never did before, but now I'm going to fucking do it all the time. I created like a round table where the panels could debate whatever they arrived at. So the 3 panels could debate. And that got super interesting. Everybody thought that John Gans and Shadi Hamid would get into a fight because accidentally it was also on like the anniversary of Gaza, just to like make it really chill. But no, like that was super, they were amazing. And we actually like debated amongst ourselves until we arrived at one thing that we all agreed on. There was a very interesting clashing And I think if you really shake things up and get people out of their comfort zone with their consent and usually pleasure here, the real clashes will be very different from what you're used to. It's not going to like be archetype or political side based cliche what you have to disagree on. In this particular case at this event, and I can share it because it's on video and this was a public event, was between basically it was the religious versus secular power, but from another panel, because Shetty was talking about he wrote a piece a couple of months prior to this on how he believes in hell. And other panelists completely attacked this. Like, how can you believe in hell? And it was so interesting. And this is like after 4 hours of conversation, right? Like we were running out of wine and it was amazing. And everybody was just like completely transfixed. And we had this basically theological debate in the middle of Manhattan on a Sunday. And people told me after that this was like the best event they've ever been to. And I was just so pleased. I think people are just much weirder and more open-minded and are much more, we are fearful of very different things than we say, and we are happy and confident about very different things than we say. And if you actually loosen up the conversation structure and allow people to just like talk about stuff, even if it means sometimes you have to like let them get through the cliche part first, because that's not the interesting stuff. The interesting stuff is like an hour in, because usually like it's very rare for attendees to get multiple goes, you know, and like really get deeper in a conversation outside like a seminary university setting. But I think for us, probably like what's really at the core is we're just really, really, really interested in what people think.
So much of it is about like social dynamics, right? What sort of mental space you're putting people. I mean, I'm thinking of things. My wife is a therapist right now as we speak. She's doing a 1-day intensive with a couple. She's a couples therapist, 6 hours with one couple. She doesn't usually do that, but she's doing like, with a lunch in between. When you put people in a closed space and layer on a lot of intense energy, deep shit happens, I guess is what I'm saying. I mean, it's also like, it's also the reality show format, right? You enclose people in a house and put them through intense experiences. And what you get authentically, even if it's engineered, is strong emotion and intensity and revelation and things like that and drama. And it sounds like you're bringing a lot of those kinds of like social dynamics, a sort of both an experimental but a just intuitive theatrical sense of how do you put people in dynamics with each other where the product is invigorating, is exciting and theatrical and entertaining rather than boring and demoralizing. I mean, you are, a sort of human engineer in that sense.
I never thought about this, but it's true that, it's kind of the Aristotelian unity that I'm borrowing from theater, which is that it works because it has a beginning and an end. You can think about unity of action in that, you create a TV series, you write a play, you write a movie, and you have to create the parameters of that world and condense. Like Vonnegut would say that you have to open in the last moment when the audience can still get involved, right? So what's the last moment to start before, like the Matrix starts, the last moment where you can still understand where you are opening, like who Neo is and why is he going to the party. But it's also true about the theater as an environment. It's important that you go there in the beginning and then they take your ticket and you sit down and then it's over and you leave. We know from like ongoing theater productions that they get really weird. You have Marina Abramović, Rhythm Zero, Yoko Ono's cutting off her clothes piece. Like it's not good if somebody's just sitting there for hours on a stage because eventually the audience will go up.
Right.
It's quite important to me. And, some people in my space are building cities or building neighborhoods. And I always said, like, I don't want that. I don't want to create a co-living situation. I respect people who do it. I visit, I will invest, anything you want. But I want a beginning and an end. I'm only responsible for people for this number of hours. And what people do outside this, that's their own thing. It's a different social contract with the audience. And that's what I can guarantee. I can guarantee for the audience through my platform and through this commercial activity that we're doing, that from the beginning to the end, you are going to have an interintellect experience. Whether you then get like caught in the rain and catch a cold, I'm very sorry, but that's not part of the universe, the unity of our world.
And it's important that you've spent money on it too, probably.
That's very important. Very few people pay $45 and then go and fuck up an event.
Well, right, and you talk yourself into enjoying it. But I don't mean that in a false sense. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
you are involved in helping making it enjoyable for yourself. Yes.
You want people to come out on the other side somewhat detoxified, right? Or more able to sort of participate in a meaningful sense in democratic culture. Is that a fair, I mean, way to think about what you're hoping for?
I mean, for myself, definitely Interact completely changed me. I was a much more I literally took a Big Five test recently because Olga Kazan was on my platform with her book, Me But Better, about the science of changing one's personality. And so I retook the Big Five test. Last time I took it was 2019. So I can literally see my personality
You're
change in
you're
this
different, yeah.
completely different, but it's amazing. It's like I'm much less neurotic, I'm much less disagreeable. I was much more like a defensive person, I think, when I started, and I had a much lower trust in people. And just doing this for 6 years with like thousands and thousands and thousands of people, like over, you really learn that people are great. I feel sorry for people who are not exposed to this kind of experience. On the other hand, like I also am kind of in the front row observing how people's lives change because maybe like one event is not going to be like, I mean, there have been cathartic events, like really, really cathartic events, but like if somebody is there for years, I mean, we have many relationships, now many marriages, now many babies born to people who met in Interact. Every once in a while I get like a ring photo in my DMs, like, oh, we have some news. Okay, great. People write books together, people quit their jobs, people move to different countries. There's an EU funded art project doing movies and exhibitions around Europe, all of them Interact hosts who met there. So, this is kind of my abundance agenda. Like, look at what you have built. And if
Yeah.
you are building good things, it means that something, maybe not the whole thing that works. I'm sure it's very imperfect and I could be doing a much better job at a lot of things, but something has to be working if it's giving so much value to people that they can take that value and create lives that are fuller and happier with what comes out of Interact.
We need that stuff, and it seems like it's a health producing, it's a kind of psychological health producing endeavor for the people who participate in it, which is awesome.
And you can immediately pay it back, right? Like if you come to an Interact event or any similar projects, right? And you can say like, oh, this is great, I'm going to host the next one.
Yeah, right.
And then you have new participants who come for you and they might also, so it's like there is a kind of virality to it. But to me, this is like I'm running the Tocqueville reading group on Interact since the elections, because I think like this is the time to read Democracy in America. And to me, this is Tocquevillian democracy, that it's not about big government projects that tell people how to be better citizens. It's people running companies and creating organizations and being active in their church or school, whatever is at your avail. And just trusting that many people will do it. And there's a good mimetic rivalry also, that if something works, then another city also wants to have their own. This is just like why I think it's a democratic good to let people like me just do our jobs, which I couldn't be doing in Hungary in this sense. And it's amazing that America allows individuals to just be creative and build their crazy little projects. And if the market is like, great, we want to pay for this, then you can grow.
One thing you do well that I think a lot of people, and I don't know if you think about yourself on the left, but let's say on the sort of broad pro-democracy side, a lot of people on the left don't optimize for entertainment value in a way that like entertainment is not the right word. I mean, but you're saying this only works. This only works if it's gratifying for people, if it's pleasurable, if they come out the other side feeling invigorated rather than tired. You accept the kind of market imperatives in that sense, right? And for it to be truly mimetic, for it to scale, for it to take on a life of its own, it has to be something people want to do. It can't be something that you shame people into doing or sort of persuade people into doing, like they're eating their broccoli or like they'll go to hell if they don't do it. And so anything that sort of improves our culture in one way or another, but it's also actually desirable to do, it's not easy to engineer those things. So your attention to the mechanics of it are a super important part of the story.
Entertainment is very important, and knowing when you're doing entertainment and when you're doing something else is not as intuitive as it looks. What makes something entertaining? Entertainment is basically art. It's like the fun part of art, right? So if it's art, it means its goal is itself. So you don't come to an Interact salon to get a diploma, to get hitched, to get hired. There's no outcome. You can have those outcomes. Like I said, go find jobs in internet and stuff, but that's not the main goal you're coming for. The main goal is itself. And what art gives us as space, and we get this in entertainment from good music, a good party, it gives us space in this very crowded life to reflect about ourselves. Camus said that the only thing that an audience is interested in is ourselves. You don't give a shit about Hamlet. You want to think about your own faith and father and mother and skull, if you have it, whatever is your thing, weird girlfriend, whatever it makes you similar to Hamlet you will be reflecting on that during the play. And I just love giving people that space because I learned the hard way how important it is.
Well, welcome to America, Anna. Thanks for all the work you're doing. Thanks for coming on the show. Hopefully I'll intersect with you in person at some point in one of these cities where you hold the in-person events.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been another episode of Eminent Americans. Big thanks to my editor, producer extraordinaire, Robert Scaramuccia. Big thanks as well to Alec Owensworth of Clap Your Hands, Say Yeah for letting us use his music for our intro and outro. If you liked what you heard, and I imagine you did if you've made it this deep into the episode, then please rate us on whatever the relevant podcasting platform is. And if you have any questions or comments, email me at djops@gmail.com. That's djopps@gmail.com. I promise to respond at least until the faraway and probably mythical day when I have such a vast audience that I can't in good conscience respond to all the emails while still upholding my responsibility to my loved ones. Have a great day.